The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly across the Red Rock Desert, casting long shadows between towering saguaro cacti and weathered mesas. Thunder, a magnificent black Mustang with white markings across his chest, moved silently through the scrubland, his nostrils flaring as he tested the wind. For 3 years, he had roamed these territories free, avoiding the ropes of cowboys and the corrals of ranchers who dreamed of breaking his spirit. Today, something was different. The scent of fear hung heavy in the desert air, mixed with the metallic tang of dried blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Thunder's ears swiveled forward as he detected the sound of labored breathing from behind a cluster of barrel cacti near a dried creek bed. Moving cautiously, the Mustang rounded the natural barrier and found her, a young Apache woman, no more than 19, pressed against the red sandstone wall of a small canyon. Her deerskin dress was torn and stained with blood from a wound on her left shoulder. Long black hair fell across her face as she clutched a knife with trembling hands, her dark eyes wild with pain and exhaustion. Aiyana had been running for 3 days straight. The bounty hunters had picked up her trail outside Tucson after someone recognized her from the wanted posters that had appeared in every saloon and trading post across the territory. $500. More money than most men saw in 2 years, all for bringing in the Apache girl whose brother murdered innocent ranchers. She knew the truth was more complicated. Her brother Nalnish had raided the cattle because their people were starving on the reservation, because the government rations never came, because children were dying while white men grew fat on stolen Apache land. But truth mattered little when there was money to be made from Apache blood. Thunder approached slowly, his massive head lowered in a gesture of peace. Aiyana's grip tightened on her knife, but something in the horse's intelligent brown eyes made her pause. She had always possessed a gift with animals. Her grandmother had called it speaking the old language that all creatures understand. Shash, she whispered in Apache, using the word for bear, though she knew this was a horse. You are strong like the bear, aren't you, beautiful one? The Mustang nickered softly and took another step closer. Aiyana's vision swam as blood loss and dehydration took their toll. She could hear them now, the distant sound of horses and men's voices carrying across the desert. The bounty hunters had found her trail again. They come for me, she whispered to Thunder, switching to the broken English she had learned during her brief time at the Indian school before her family rescued her. $500 for this Apache girl, enough to make any man rich. Thunder's nostrils flared as he caught the scent of approaching riders. His experience with humans had taught him to fear the ones who came with ropes and guns. But this young woman was different. She carried no weapons of capture, only the desperate energy of prey seeking escape. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Aiyana tried to stand, but collapsed back against the stone wall, her wounded shoulder screaming in protest. Go, she urged the Mustang. Save yourself, brother horse. They will kill you too if they think you helped me. But Thunder had already made his decision. In one fluid movement, he knelt beside the wounded woman, a behavior so unusual for a wild horse that Aiyana gasped in surprise. Understanding flooded through her. This magnificent creature was offering himself as her salvation. With her remaining strength, she pulled herself onto Thunder's broad back, her hands tangling in his wild mane. The Mustang rose smoothly and began to move, not in the panicked flight she expected, but with the calculated stealth of a predator, avoiding detection. Behind them, the voices of the bounty hunters grew closer. Lost the trail at the creek bed, but she can't have gone far. Wounded Apache girl on foot. We'll have her by sundown and be $500 richer. Thunder carried Aiyana through hidden passages between rock formations, following ancient game trails that no white man knew existed. His hooves found purchase on seemingly impossible terrain as he climbed higher into the hills, away from the pursuing voices that gradually faded into the distance. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Thunder carried his precious cargo toward an uncertain destiny. Aiyana, barely conscious, could only hold on and trust in the wisdom of this wild Mustang, who had chosen to risk everything for a stranger. Neither the woman nor the horse knew that their path would lead them to a small ranch house nestled in a hidden valley where a man named Samuel Carter sat on his porch, watching the desert and wrestling with ghosts from his own past, ghosts that wore the faces of Apache warriors he had once been ordered to kill. Samuel Carter's weathered hands gripped his coffee cup as he watched the desert from his porch, the bitter brew long since gone cold. At 42, deep lines etched his face, some from the relentless Arizona sun, others from memories he couldn't escape. The faded blue of his cavalry uniform hung in his bedroom closet, a reminder of orders he'd followed and choices that haunted his dreams. His ranch sat in a hidden valley, accessible only through a narrow canyon pass that most travelers never noticed. Here, he raised a small herd of cattle and lived in the solitude he'd earned through 5 years of service in the Indian Wars. 5 years of following orders, 5 years of telling himself he was protecting settlers, 5 years of watching Apache families torn apart by his unit's raids. The sound of hooves on stone echoed from the canyon entrance, unusual enough to make Sam reach for the Winchester rifle beside his chair. What emerged from the shadows made him question his sanity. A magnificent black Mustang, carrying what appeared to be an unconscious Apache woman. Thunder approached the ranch house cautiously, his intelligent eyes assessing this new human. The scent of gunpowder and old violence clung to the man on the porch, but beneath it lay something else, regret perhaps, and a deep weariness that mirrored Thunder's own wariness of the human world. Sam rose slowly, setting down his rifle but keeping it within reach. "Easy there, boy," he murmured to the Mustang. "What have you brought me?" Aiyana stirred at the sound of his voice, her fever-bright eyes opening to focus on the white man standing before a modest adobe house. Panic flared in her chest as she recognized the bearing of a soldier, even in civilian clothes. Her hand moved instinctively toward her knife, but weakness made the gesture futile. "Please," she whispered in English, her voice cracked from thirst. Do not turn me in for the bounty." Sam's breath caught as he saw the blood on her dress, the exhaustion in her face, and the desperate fear in her dark eyes. This wasn't the fierce Apache warrior of military reports. This was a young woman, barely more than a girl, wounded and terrified. "How much?" he asked quietly. $500, Aiyana replied, her voice barely audible. "For the sister of Nalnish, the cattle raider." Sam's jaw tightened. He knew that name, knew the circumstances of the raid that had prompted the bounty. Nalnish had struck the Richardson ranch 3 weeks ago, taking cattle while the family was away. No one had been hurt, but the territorial newspapers had painted it as a massacre, inflaming anti-Apache sentiment across the region. Thunder snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the tension between the two humans. The Mustang's message was clear. He had brought her here for a reason, and he expected this man to honor that trust. "Can you stand?" Sam asked, moving closer despite every instinct telling him to saddle his horse and ride for town, turn her in, collect the reward that would keep his ranch running for another year. I think so," Aiyana replied. But when she tried to slide down from Thunder's back, her legs buckled. Sam caught her before she could fall, and immediately felt the fever burning through her skin. "Infected wound," he muttered, recognizing the signs from his army days. "You've been running with this for how long?" 3 days, she admitted, leaning heavily against him despite her distrust. "Bullet grazed my shoulder. Bounty hunters. They are close behind." Sam looked toward the canyon entrance, calculating. The hidden pass would buy them time, but not much. If professional bounty hunters were on her trail, they would eventually find this place. "Why should I help you?" he asked, though even as the words left his mouth, he was already supporting her weight, already guiding her toward his house. Aiyana raised her head to meet his eyes, and in that moment, Sam saw something that shattered his carefully constructed isolation. He saw his younger sister Mary, who had died of fever at age 19. He saw the Apache children he'd watched flee their burning villages. He saw all the faces that visited him in his nightmares. "Because," Aiyana said simply, You know what it means to run from something you cannot escape." Thunder followed them to the porch, his hooves clicking on the wooden boards as if he belonged there. The Mustang positioned himself to watch the canyon entrance, taking up the role of sentinel without being asked. Inside the modest house, Sam helped Aiyana onto his kitchen table, where the light from the window would let him examine her wound. As he gathered clean cloth and whiskey for antiseptic, she studied the sparse interior, a soldier's quarters, functional and bare, except for a small framed photograph of a young woman with kind eyes. "Your wife?" Aiyana asked as Sam began cleaning her wound, his touch surprisingly gentle for such large hands. "My sister," Sam replied curtly, then added more softly, "She died 5 years ago. Fever, like what you're fighting now." Aiyana bit back a cry of pain as Sam worked, but she watched his face intently. "You have kind hands for a soldier," she observed. "You were cavalry." It wasn't a question. Sam's movements stilled. "How do you know?" "The way you sit, the way you move. My father fought your kind for many years before the reservation." She paused, studying his expression. "You have the look of a man who has seen too much war." Sam resumed his work in silence, but Aiyana's words hit their mark. Outside, thunder whinnied softly, a warning that riders approached the canyon entrance. Through the window, they could see dust rising in the distance. "They found the trail," Aiyana whispered, fear returning to her voice. "You should turn me over to them. $500 would buy much for your ranch." Sam finished bandaging her shoulder and looked out at the approaching dust cloud. 3 riders, moving fast and determined. In a few minutes, they would discover the hidden pass. In an hour, they would be at his door, demanding answers he wasn't prepared to give. $500, he repeated quietly, then looked at the photograph of his sister. "Mary always said I never could resist helping strays." He turned to Aiyana with a decision made, one that would change both their lives forever. "Can you ride?" "If I must." "Then we'd better get moving. There's an old mine shaft in the hills behind the house. We can hide there until they move on." Drill! As Sam gathered supplies and helped Aiyana to her feet, Thunder appeared at the open door, ready to resume his role as protector. The Mustang's trust in this man seemed absolute, and Aiyana found herself beginning to share it. Whatever came next, the 3 of them would face it together. The abandoned mine shaft carved into the hillside behind Sam's ranch had been his refuge before, a place where he came to escape the memories that plagued his sleepless nights. Now, as he helped Aiyana settle against the cool stone wall in the deepest recess of the tunnel, it served a different purpose entirely. Thunder had refused to be left behind, following them up the treacherous path with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat. The Mustang now stood at the mine entrance, his ears constantly swiveling as he monitored the sounds from the valley below. Through the narrow opening, they could see Sam's ranch house growing smaller in the distance. "How long before they reach your home?" Aiyana asked, her voice steadier now, despite the pain that clouded her eyes. The cool air of the mine seemed to ease her fever slightly. 20 minutes, maybe 30 if they're being cautious about the canyon pass," Sam replied, checking his pocket watch. "These bounty hunters, you know their names?" Aiyana nodded grimly. "The leader is called Morse, Jake Morse. He brought in my cousin 2 years ago. Dead." Her voice carried no emotion, but Sam noticed how her hands clenched. "The others I do not know, but they ride with him by choice. That makes them dangerous." Sam had heard of Jake Morse, a man who had made a profitable career hunting Apache fugitives across the territory, the kind of man who saw dollar signs instead of human faces, who had never met a bounty he wouldn't collect regardless of the circumstances. Thunder suddenly tensed, his head turning toward the valley. In the distance, they could see 3 riders emerging from the canyon pass, moving in the disciplined formation of experienced hunters. Even from this distance, Sam could make out their leader, a tall man in a black hat riding a gray horse, scanning the landscape with the methodical patience of a predator. "Tell me about your brother," Sam said quietly, settling beside Aiyana as they watched the riders approach his house. The newspapers painted him as a savage killer, but I'm guessing there's more to the story. Aiyana's laugh held no humor. Nal Nish is many things, but he is not a killer of innocence. The newspapers, they do not speak of the children who died last winter because the government rations never came. They do not speak of the promises broken, the land stolen, the sacred places defiled. She paused, watching as the bounty hunters dismounted at Sam's house and began searching the area around it. My brother took cattle to feed our people. No one was harmed. The Richardson family was visiting relatives in Tucson. But hungry Apache children do not sell newspapers the way savage raids do. Sam absorbed this information, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. How many times had he followed orders based on such distorted reports? How many Apache families had suffered because men like him had believed the convenient lies that made their actions seem justified? You feel guilt, soldier, Aiyana observed, studying his profile. But you were not at the Richardson ranch. Why does my brother's story trouble you? Because I've been Jake Morse, Sam admitted quietly. Maybe not for money, but for orders that seemed righteous at the time. I've chased Apache families through these same hills, telling myself I was protecting innocent settlers. Thunder snorted softly, as if commenting on the conversation. Below them, the bounty hunters had finished searching the house and were now examining the ground around it, looking for signs of recent visitors. There was a village, Sam continued, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 years ago, up in the Dragoon Mountains, we received reports of a war party staging raids from there. When we arrived, we found mostly women, children, and elderly men. The warriors were away hunting. Aiyana remained silent, but Sam could feel her attention focused on him like a physical weight. My commanding officer ordered us to arrest everyone, march them back to the reservation, but one of the children, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, she tried to run to her grandmother. One of my men thought she was going for a weapon. Sam's hands clenched into fists. The sound she made when the bullet hit her, I hear it every night. And after? Aiyana asked softly. After, I realized I couldn't tell the difference between the people I was supposed to protect and the people I was supposed to fight. So I finished my enlistment and came here, to the middle of nowhere, where the only person I could hurt was myself. Below them, one of the bounty hunters was pointing toward the hills, apparently having noticed the path that led to the mine. Jake Morse nodded and remounted his horse, directing his men to spread out and begin a methodical search of the surrounding area. They have found our trail, Aiyana observed. You still have time to turn me over to them. Your conscience would be clean. You helped a wounded woman, fed her, bandaged her wound. No one could blame you for collecting the bounty after that. Sam looked at her, seeing not the savage Apache of the wanted posters, but a young woman whose only crime was being born into the wrong race at the wrong time in history. A woman whose brother had risked everything to feed starving children. My conscience hasn't been clean in years, he said, but maybe helping you is a start. Thunder suddenly backed deeper into the mine, his warning clear. The sound of approaching hooves echoed off the canyon walls as the bounty hunters began their ascent toward the mine entrance. Sam checked his revolver and looked around the tunnel, calculating their options. There's another way out, he whispered to Aiyana. Old ventilation shaft that connects to a cave system on the far side of the hill. It's a tight squeeze, but it leads to a hidden spring where Thunder can drink and we can refill our water. And then? Aiyana asked, though she was already struggling to her feet, her wounded shoulder protesting the movement. Then we keep running until we figure out how to clear your name and get that bounty lifted, Sam replied, surprised by his own words. Because I'm done following orders that destroy innocent lives. Thunder moved to Aiyana's side, offering his support as they prepared to venture deeper into the darkness of the mine. Behind them, the voices of the bounty hunters grew closer, their horses' hooves ringing against stone as they climbed toward what they believed would be an easy capture. But the Mustang, the Apache woman, and the guilt-ridden former soldier had other plans. In the depths of the mountain, they would discover that sometimes redemption requires choosing the difficult path, even when easier alternatives promise immediate reward. The real test of their unlikely alliance was just beginning. The ventilation shaft was even narrower than Sam had remembered, forcing them to move single file through passages that seemed to close in around them like a stone throat. Thunder, despite his size, navigated the tight spaces with surprising grace, his hooves finding purchase on the smooth rock worn by decades of water flow. Behind them, the angry voices of the bounty hunters echoed through the main mine tunnel. Fresh tracks lead right to the entrance, but there's no sign of them inside. Jake Morse's voice carried clearly through the mountain. Spread out. Check every crevice. They're here somewhere. Aiyana pressed close behind Sam as they crawled through a particularly narrow section, her breathing labored from fever and exertion. The bandage on her shoulder was seeping blood again, but she made no complaint. Thunder brought up the rear, somehow managing to fold his powerful frame through spaces that should have been impossible for a horse his size. How much farther? Aiyana whispered, as they emerged into a slightly wider passage. Not far now, Sam replied, though sweat beaded his forehead from the close quarters and the weight of responsibility he felt for both his companions. The cave system opens up ahead, and there's fresh water. Eat! As if summoned by his words, the sound of running water began to echo from somewhere ahead. The passage gradually widened until they could stand upright again, and finally opened into a natural cathedral of stone. Sunlight filtered down through cracks in the ceiling, illuminating an underground spring that bubbled up from the depths to form a clear pool before disappearing into another tunnel. Thunder immediately moved to the water's edge, drinking deeply while his ears remained alert for any sound of pursuit. Sam helped Aiyana settle on a flat boulder beside the spring, noting how pale she had become during their underground journey. We need to change that bandage, he said, pulling medical supplies from his saddlebags. And you need rest. There is no time for rest, Aiyana protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Morse will not give up easily. The bounty is too high, and his reputation depends on never losing a trail. Sam began unwrapping the bloodied cloth from her shoulder, his touch gentle but efficient. Then we need to be smarter than him. What do you know about the man who placed the bounty? This Richardson, is he acting alone? Aiyana winced as Sam cleaned the wound, but her mind remained sharp. Richardson is weak, a follower, not a leader. The real power behind this bounty comes from Marcus Whitfield, the territorial representative. He owns half the land between here and Tucson, and he wants the other half, including the reservation lands where my people try to survive. Whitfield, Sam repeated, recognizing the name. The man had been building political power and personal wealth on anti-Apache sentiment for years, using every raid and conflict to justify taking more land. He's been pushing for the complete removal of all Apache tribes from Arizona territory. Yes, and my brother's raid gave him the excuse he needed. One savage attack becomes proof that all Apache must be driven out or destroyed. Aiyana's eyes flashed with anger despite her weakness. Whitfield does not care about stolen cattle. He cares about stolen land, our land. Thunder suddenly raised his head from the spring, water dripping from his muzzle as he stared toward one of the tunnel entrances. In the distance, they could hear the echo of hoofbeats and voices. The bounty hunters had found another way into the cave system. Time to go, Sam said, quickly finishing with Aiyana's bandage. Can you ride? Do I have a choice? Sam helped her onto Thunder's back, then led them toward a passage that angled upward toward what he hoped was another exit. The Mustang seemed to know these caves better than Sam did, confidently choosing paths at each junction as if following some ancient memory of safe routes through the mountain. As they climbed through the winding passages, Aiyana spoke quietly. Why do you truly help me, Samuel Carter? And do not tell me it is only guilt over past actions. There is something more. Sam was quiet for a long moment, leading Thunder carefully around a treacherous turn where the floor dropped away into darkness. Because I'm tired of being on the wrong side of history, he finally said. For 5 years, I followed orders that I told myself were necessary. I helped implement policies that I convinced myself were just. But every night, I dream of that little girl's face. And you think saving me will balance those scales? No, Sam admitted. Nothing can balance those scales. But maybe it's not about balance. Maybe it's about choosing to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you everything you have left. They emerged from the cave system onto a narrow ledge high on the mountain's western face. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert below in shades of gold and crimson. Far below, they could see Sam's ranch house, looking peaceful and innocent despite the hunt taking place in the tunnels beneath them. Thunder picked his way carefully along a game trail that led down the mountain's backside, away from the valley where the bounty hunters continued their search. Here, ancient petroglyphs covered the rock walls, Apache symbols that told stories of hunts and journeys, of spirits and sacred places. My grandmother carved some of these, Aiyana said, pointing to a series of symbols that depicted horses running free across stone plains. She said, "The mountains remember everything, every footstep, every prayer, every act of courage or cowardice." "What do you think they'll remember about us?" Sam asked. Aiyana was quiet for a moment, studying the ancient artwork. "Perhaps they will remember that sometimes, when the world seems divided by hatred and fear, a Mustang, an Apache woman, and a white soldier found a way to trust each other." As they descended toward the desert floor, a new plan began to form in Sam's mind. Running would only delay the inevitable. As long as the bounty stood, Aiyana would never be safe. But if they could expose the truth behind Whitfield's manipulation, if they could prove that Nalnish's raid was justified by governmental failures and that the bounty was based on political greed rather than justice. "We're not just running anymore," Sam announced as they reached level ground. "We're going to Tucson." "Tucson?" Aiyana stared at him in disbelief. "That is where Whitfield has the most power, where the bounty hunters will expect us to avoid. It is suicide." "Maybe," Sam agreed, "but it's also where the territorial records are kept, where the newspaper offices print their lies, and where people might actually listen if we can present them with the truth." Thunder snorted and tossed his head, as if approving of this bold plan. In the distance, a dust cloud marked where the frustrated bounty hunters were finally emerging from the cave system, having lost the trail completely. "Besides," Sam added with a grim smile, "sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight, and I have a feeling that Whitfield's carefully constructed lies might not hold up under close examination." As the three unlikely allies rode toward an uncertain future, the desert wind carried their scent away from the tracking dogs below, while ancient spirits carved in stone watched over their passage through the land that had seen countless such journeys of courage, desperation, and hope. The outskirts of Tucson shimmered in the morning heat as Sam, Aiyana, and Thunder approached the territorial capital. They had traveled through the night, avoiding main roads and keeping to arroyos and desert trails that Thunder seemed to navigate by instinct. Now, as the adobe buildings and wooden storefronts of the growing town came into view, the magnitude of their gamble became clear. "Half the territory wants me dead or captured," Aiyana observed, pulling the wide-brimmed hat Sam had given her lower over her face. "And the other half wants you court-martialed for desertion. This plan grows more foolish with each mile." Sam checked his pocket watch, 8:30 in the morning. "The Territorial Assembly doesn't convene until 10. That gives us time to gather the evidence we need before Whitfield realizes we're here." They had spent the ride planning their approach. If Whitfield was using fabricated reports and manipulated newspaper accounts to justify his anti-Apache policies, then the truth would be hidden in the Territorial Records Office. Sam's military credentials might still open doors that would remain closed to others, at least long enough to find what they needed. Thunder carried them to a small stable on the town's edge, run by an elderly Mexican man named Diego, who asked no questions when Sam paid him double the usual rate to keep the Mustang hidden and well-fed. The old man's knowing eyes suggested he understood they were harboring secrets, but his weathered face showed only sympathy. "Vayan con Dios," Diego murmured as they prepared to enter the town on foot. "The desert has many ways of protecting those who respect her children." The Territorial Records Office occupied a squat adobe building on Tucson's Main Street, its thick walls designed to keep documents safe from both fire and the occasional Apache raid. Sam's heart pounded as they approached the entrance, acutely aware that every step deeper into town increased their chances of recognition. Inside, a young clerk named Thomas Morrison looked up from his ledgers with the bored expression of a man whose job rarely brought excitement. That expression changed to nervous attention when he recognized Sam's military bearing and the official tone of voice that commanded obedience. "I need to review the reports filed on Apache activities in the Dragoon Mountains area, specifically anything related to the Richardson Ranch incident," Sam announced, placing his discharge papers on the desk with enough authority to discourage questions. "Of course, sir," Morrison replied, though his eyes kept darting to Aiyana, who had positioned herself to appear as Sam's guide or translator. "Those files are, well, they're quite extensive. Territorial Representative Whitfield has been very thorough in documenting Apache hostilities." As Morrison retrieved the files, Sam and Aiyana exchanged glances. The clerk's nervous energy suggested there was indeed something to find in those documents. The first file contained the official report of Nalnish's raid, a document that bore little resemblance to the newspaper accounts that had inflamed public opinion. According to the territorial ranger who had investigated the scene, no violence had occurred. The Richardson family had been visiting relatives in Tucson, and the only evidence of Apache presence was missing cattle and horse tracks leading toward the reservation. "Look at this," Aiyana whispered, pointing to a notation in the margin. "The cattle were found 2 days later, most of them returned to Richardson's herd by tribal police. Only 12 head remained missing, barely enough to feed a family for a month." But it was the second file that revealed the true scope of Whitfield's deception. Internal correspondence between the territorial representative and newspaper editors showed a coordinated campaign to exaggerate Apache threats and justify increased military action. One letter, dated a week before Nalnish's raid, outlined plans to create public sentiment favorable to complete Apache removal through strategic media management. "He knew," Sam breathed, scanning the damning correspondence. "Whitfield knew that most Apache families were starving on the reservation because government rations weren't being delivered. He deliberately withheld food supplies to provoke desperate raids, then used those raids to justify taking more land." Morrison had returned with additional files, but something in his demeanor had changed. His nervous glances toward the door suggested they were no longer alone in the building. "Gentlemen," a smooth voice called from the entrance, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Marcus Whitfield stood in the doorway, flanked by Jake Morse and 2 other bounty hunters. The territorial representative was a tall, well-dressed man whose political smile couldn't quite hide the coldness in his pale eyes. "Mr. Carter," Whitfield continued, stepping into the room with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling every situation. "Former Sergeant Carter, I should say. Your military record shows remarkable dedication to duty. It's disappointing to see you throw away your honor for $500 worth of Apache trouble." "The only trouble here," Sam replied, his hand moving slowly toward his revolver, "is a politician who's willing to starve children to steal their land." Whitfield's smile never wavered, but Morse and his men began spreading out to block potential escape routes. Inflammatory accusations from a deserter and his savage accomplice hardly constitute evidence of wrongdoing. However, I'm prepared to be generous. Surrender the girl, and I'll ensure that your court-martial is conducted with full consideration of your previous service record." Aiyana stepped forward, pulling off her hat to let her long black hair fall free. "I am Aiyana, daughter of Chief Mape, sister of Nalnish, and I am not afraid of your lies anymore." "Ah, brave words," Whitfield replied, "but courage won't stop a bullet. Mr. Morse, please collect your bounty." But as the bounty hunters drew their weapons, the sound of hoofbeats thundered outside the building. Through the window, they could see Thunder rearing on his hind legs in the street, his powerful form silhouetted against the morning sun. The Mustang's challenging whinny echoed off the adobe walls, and suddenly the street filled with curious townspeople drawn by the spectacle. "Now," Sam whispered to Aiyana, and together they dove behind the heavy wooden counter as Morrison scrambled for safety. The confrontation that followed was brief but decisive. Sam's military training served him well in the confined space, while Aiyana's knowledge of her opponent's tactics helped them anticipate Morse's moves. But it was Thunder who provided the deciding factor. The Mustang's continued commotion outside had drawn not just curious citizens, but also the town sheriff and his deputies. When Sheriff Williams burst through the door with 3 armed men behind him, he found Whitfield and the bounty hunters holding Sam and Aiyana at gunpoint while territorial documents lay scattered across the floor. "What in blazes is going on here?" Williams demanded, his weathered face taking in the scene with the practiced eye of a lawman who had survived 30 years on the frontier. "Sheriff," Whitfield said smoothly, "these criminals broke into a government building and assaulted territorial officials. I demand their immediate arrest." But Sam was already gathering the scattered documents, particularly the correspondence that revealed Whitfield's manipulation. "Sheriff Williams, I believe you'll find these papers very interesting reading. They show how certain territorial officials have been deliberately provoking Apache raids to justify land seizures." As the sheriff examined the evidence, his expression grew increasingly grim. The correspondence was damning enough, but Morrison, perhaps seeking to protect himself from future prosecution, confirmed that Whitfield had pressured him to hide certain reports while emphasizing others. "Mr. Whitfield," Sheriff Williams said finally, "I believe you and I need to have a very long conversation. And as for this bounty," he turned to Aiyana with something approaching respect. "Young lady, if these documents are authentic, then the charges against your brother and the bounty on your head are based on fraudulent claims." Outside, Thunder's triumphant neigh carried across the desert, as if announcing to the ancient spirits carved in distant stone that justice, however delayed, had finally found its way to the territorial capital. 2 hours later, as Aiyana's name was cleared and Whitfield was led away in shackles, the 3 unlikely allies stood together in the street outside the records office. The crowd had dispersed, but word was already spreading throughout the territory that the Apache bounties had been based on political corruption rather than legitimate threats. "So what happens now?" Aiyana asked, watching as Thunder approached them with the dignified bearing of a Mustang who had helped change the course of history. "Now," Sam replied, "you go home to your people with proof that the government rations will be restored and the land seizures will stop. And I," he paused, looking at the Mustang who had burrowed,